Welcome to the harmonic editions of this episode of 1320 Time Stream. What we're dealing with here is the 53rd gene key, which is also the 44th harmonic. Now, we're going to be going through the shadow, the gift, and the city as the first 3 days of the harmonic, and the fourth day will be represented by the commentary. So in personal practice, you're invited to, but don't have to. Experience the first day as the shadow, the second day as the gift, and the third day as the city, so as to give specific portals and containment fields and allow for those energies to be present as they are, and to say, okay, cool, let's just go into this energy for the day, right? And then, well, let's go into that energy. Tomorrow, let's go into that energy. And then it's a mix of all three. We can really just see how that shows up in our lives and really just claim that learning, claim that wisdom for ourselves. Okay. Let's get into it. The 53rd shadow, immaturity, the false cult of the individual. There is an old folk saying that most of us have heard many times before: begin as you mean to go on. And although a cliche, it is a piece of wisdom very appropriate to the 53rd shadow, which concerns the energy inherent in all beings. Before you begin anything new in your life, you need to ask yourself, what is the true essence of this beginning? The majority of people don't realize that most beginnings contain subtle traces of fear. If these grains of fear are present at the very source of your endeavor, you'll have unwittingly planted the seeds of its eventual demise. Little entry here. This is exactly what I was talking about compromise and about sovereignty. You have to make it truly your own choice. Fear is a compromise. Fear is an investment in an energy that is simply not yourself. It is not supported in this transition we're doing, in this full awakening of our consciousness that we're participating in. It has no realm. It is a cultivation in an unsustainable separation. Let us continue. At the shadow frequency, fear is an inner yoke inexorably bound to human intention. An intention is like an arrow that you load into the bow of your actions. No matter how much work you put into something, if the arrow is bent, it will never quite hit the mark you're intending. In the context of this gene key, what we call immaturity is really nothing more than the human tendency to keep loading bent arrows into your bow. Because of this, no matter how well-meaning your actions, at a low frequency you can only lead to further disharmony. Since the 53rd shadow is so closely linked to its programming partner, the 54th shadow of greed, the most common expression of immaturity often involves power and money. Thus, in the world of commerce, we find fear to be at the root of almost all businesses. Even those that claim to be service-based, the world has not yet really seen what can happen when a business puts service before survival. Even though there are a few early examples surfacing in the world today, in human business, at the shadow frequency, growth is praised above all else, even though too much growth is unsustainable and damaging to the environment. However, the 53rd shadow does not only concern business, it is a genetic reflex at the root of our whole civilization. Because of this fear reflex within us, we cannot comprehend the great laws of nature, the prime law being that of abundance. Where nature is left to her own devices, she flourishes while at the same time never losing touch with the overall picture. In nature, if one species becomes too prolific, then a counteracting force responds to the imbalance and restores equilibrium. Humans, too, is a part of nature and is subject to these same laws, although we behave as though we are outside of them. Another interlude. I find I really speak to this a lot in these transmissions, and it really comes down to how we sell ourselves. We give ourselves for whatever our own reasons, whether we are trained or bred into fear of failure or bred into survivalist mentality, where we don't connect primarily with that bioorganic embodiment of our abundance. And this is what I was talking about earlier, by having witnessed many communities who do. Now, I'm not saying that you can naturally just live off the land, but I guess what I am saying is we're in critical times where it's time to really reassess what this looks like to you and take a really serious step towards cultivating some of this deeper natural connection in your life. This is time. It's time. As one of the 6 internal pressures forming the codon ring of seeking, the 53rd gene key is responsible for creating a great deal of stress at the shadow frequency. The stress this caused in our modern world is directly reflected in the desire to become materially rich. Great individual wealth is unsustainable, unless you have a higher purpose that requires it. Keep in mind that there is a vast difference between prosperity and wealth. Wealth is a stockpiling of money based upon fear and greed, whereas prosperity is a flow that expands the contracts within universal rhythms. Prosperity adjusts itself automatically to the needs of your higher purpose. Wealth is in no way equivalent to fulfillment. In fact, it most commonly leads to the opposite. The essence of the ring of seeking is to lead you out of your immaturity by showing you the true nature of your desire, greed, and fear. Thus, we learn in time that the fulfillment we seek is within us rather than outside of us. The shadow of immaturity is rooted in the human tendency to see ourselves as separate from nature. The human mind has enormous difficulty seeing itself as a collective organism that is deeply embedded in nature and the earth. If one of us commits a selfish act or an act rooted in fear, if one of us commits a selfish act or an act rooted in fear, it reinforces that act throughout the totality, which in turn strengthens its vibration in the world. This is what immaturity is, an aspect of the whole that does not yet realize that it is the whole. However, human beings have always sensed the inherent balancing force woven into creation. It is reflected, for instance, in the Buddhist and Hindu doctrine of karma, the law that every cause results in an effect that directly influences our own future. The common oversight here is that it is not only we as individuals who affect our future, but we as a collective. I'm so grateful how aligned all these gene keys tend to be with the cycles at large. Because in the throat chakra sequence, it's largely about collective consciousness. Even though it's actually always about collective consciousness, it's the different energy centers inside of us as we move through them and allow for the natural pulse and arrangement and geometry of those vibrations to be kind of purified and worked with and embodied in such a way as though they're healthy, then we can have a healthy totality or healthy energetic body, and that directly connects with our ability to sustain our connection with that collective consciousness. And that in fact is our responsibility. Creating a better life for ourselves doesn't look like financially getting ahead, doesn't look like being able to pay your rent. Ultimately, none of that matters. As much as that may be challenging for you to hear, I'd like you to create space in your mind, body, and soul to really begin opening yourself up to a different picture other than financial acquisition as a feeling of your personal success. Because we're the ones creating this dream here, so we have to challenge ourselves to create a different dream, to create a different code of conduct and a different value system. Now is the time. Okay, where are we here? In order for human beings to evolve, we have to pass the phase of our development in which we learn that we are a single, unified organism by witnessing the damage we inflict on that organism. We are like a child who pushes the mother until the mother disciplines the child. We must drop our primal fear of death above all else. Even our spiritual yearning to mentally project ourselves beyond this lifetime in the form of a reincarnating soul or separate spiritual being is subtly rooted in our fear of dissolving back into pure consciousness. It is the fractal pattern of evolution that moves onward, not our attachment to it. Death cleanly severs our attachment to our individuality, and yet, for millennia, humanity has been too afraid to really see this. We do indeed sense the continuity of life, but we also insist on projecting our individuality into it. We have created a great cult based on the individual, even though the individual itself is an illusion. Thank you for writing this, Richard Rudd. Truly, you're a song to my soul and help really get the message by that is, part of this evolutionary based system. Thank you for this voice. Thank you for this inspiration and this empowerment in this way. This work is truly impeccable. Why is it that we human beings cannot accept our morality, our mortality? Why is it that we human beings cannot accept our mortality? The answer is simple. Life would appear too frightening. Life has no morals. Life has no concepts of individual justice. At the level of the absolute, there is no individual soul that survives death. Even though the existence of a reincarnating higher causal body has relative truth to it within the framework of the Maya, see the 22nd gene key, a mystical experience we have that falls short of an immersion in pure consciousness is a subtle projection of our individual need to go on existing. The fact is that the 53rd shadow of immaturity builds all these illusions into our minds. Life is simple and pure and doesn't require our projections. There is only the continuity of consciousness following its bloodlines, its fractal lines, and its collective evolutionary mythology. These truths are often shocking to the mind, and it is complex systems of belief and projections based on fear. It is through these two shadows of greed and immaturity that humanity must finally awaken to its nature as a single organism. Like a child, we must eventually grow out of our self-obsession and reach maturity. The original Chinese name of this 53rd hexagram in the I Ching is development, and so it is. Just like a young child, humanity is an organism that is too self-obsessed to be aware of the consequences of its actions. Although we are still immature, it is written into our DNA that we will gradually discover our actions do carry consequences, even though these consequences may only be realized by future generations. As such, individuals who are judged as evil need to be understood as aspects of the totality displaying its immaturity. Our desire to punish any individual may seem natural at the shadow frequency, but it represents a level of self-delusion. When seen from a collective level, instead of punishing itself, our organism has learned to understand itself better. What then does the 53rd shadow mean for you as an individual? It means that what the Buddha said is absolutely true. Everything is constantly passing away and beginning again. You display your immaturity when you try to impose an external view or doctrine on life. Everything you do from the shadow frequency is rooted in the fear of non-existence. Like a weed burrowing deep into the psyche, this fear prevents consciousness from fully penetrating your form. The grace of the 53rd shadow is in showing you that you are immature until you begin to understand how deeply your actions, thoughts, and words are rooted in this fear. As you come to understand this vast and sweeping insight, your heart begins once again to open and trust in life, just as it is, with no opinion, no judgment, no attachment, and above all, no fear. The repressed nature, solemn. When the incredible vital energy to begin new things is repressed, it creates a very solemn human being. These people usually become fixed into a single activity their whole lives. There is a deep sense of sadness in such people, as though they might implode at any moment. It takes an enormous pressure to be serious in life, and it betrays a vast unconscious reservoir of fear. These people also find it near impossible to embrace new things in life. They try to hang on to control by keeping everything exactly as it is. Such people do not cope at all well with change, and it tends to drive them even deeper inside themselves, where they wall themselves off from the world. These people often end their lives with a great sorrow surrounding them. The reactive nature, fickle. The reactive side of this 53rd shadow never sits still long, even to allow a person to evolve. Instead, they move from one thing to the next without following through with anything. These people are always beginning new things, but without any sense of commitment in developing them further. The only reason such people begin something new is to escape their greatest fear of being trapped in a cycle in which they may have to face themselves. Ironically, they do remain trapped in a repetitive cycle of beginnings that lead nowhere. The lives of such people may look exciting at times, but they lack any real depth of fulfillment. The reactive nature is about the unconscious expressions of one's fear as anger. Because these people are not honest in who they are, they trigger angry reactions wherever they go, further justifying their urge to be fickle. Very profound wisdoms here in the shadow. I'm feeling very aligned with this work here in this day and this time. Okay, so that was the shadow of our 44th harmonic, which was Jinky 53. Stay tuned for the gift.